Hey there everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're going to discuss the GCD in World of Warcraft. This is the biggest change on this week's beta build, was that Blizzard has actually relented on the recent stance they've had on the global cooldown and how it relates to some major cooldowns, and they've removed a lot of the abilities that they previously added, I think around about the start of BFA, onto the global cooldown. Those have been removed. We actually have the list of things that have been removed over here, thanks to Wowhead has compiled the full list of them. So for example, we can see for the Frost Death Knights, Pillar of Frost and Empower Rune Weapon are now off of the global cooldown, which is a massive change for them because they're two of your major cooldowns, Pillar of Frost being 45-second cooldown, strength buff, and Empower Rune Weapon being the 2-minute haste and rune generation and runic power buff. Those are two cooldowns you'd be popping together sort of back to back at the start on pull, so that really speeds them up. We have Berserk for the Feral and Guardian Druid and Celestial Alignment for Balanced Druid. They're off GCD, and the Incarnation versions of those. Ravenous Frenzy is off GCD. That's one of their Covenant abilities. For the Hunters aspect of the Wild is off GCD, though Bestial Wrath is still on it. Arcane Power and Icy Veins for the Mages. Of course, Combustion already off GCD. Serenity, Storm, Earth, and Fire for Monks are now off GCD. I've actually seen some monks complain that this could be a problem, that when Storm, Earth, and Fire was off GCD before, that there was an issue where because you press the button and it takes a little bit of time for those monk spirits to actually spawn in, that if you did an attack, if you did a spell like Rising Sun Kick, for example, straight after pressing Storm, Earth, and Fire off GCD, that it could actually bug out, and you'd only have your spirit would be the only one that would do it, so you'd only hit for 45% normal damage. The other two spirits wouldn't actually do it. So this could be one that actually should stay on the global cooldown, just simply to avoid... There's a lot of bugs with the AI of this spell. For the Paladins, there's a PvP talent, but Avenging Wrath, Avenging Crusader, Crusade, and then Holy Avenger have all come off the GCD. For the Rogues, their major cooldowns, Adrenaline Rush, Shadow Blades, and Vendetta, off GCD now. Shaman, they have Ancestral Guidance, just a talent, off GCD. Warlocks, their Dark Soul talents are off GCD. For the Warriors then, Avatar Recklessness are off GCD, and Sweeping Strikes, not off GCD, but has a reduced GCD. I think that it probably should be off GCD, to be honest with you. But I want to dive a bit more in depth then and just give my overall opinion. Actually, let me speak very briefly about this. What is my overall opinion of these changes and these additional changes as well in terms of the GCD? What is my overall philosophy on the GCD? For me, I think this. I would definitely say that I don't think that this was the place to start with getting rid of some of the GCD restrictions. Because I think out of all of the things that they added a GCD to, I do have to say that I think the burst cooldowns, your big damage cooldowns, was the one that actually made the most sense to me when they initially put these in, because the idea was for PvP specifically that it would give you just an extra GCD of time to react. When you saw an enemy pop their damage cooldown, it would give you time to react and get your defensive up or get your crowd control out. You wouldn't, they wouldn't like catch you by surprise and nuke a massive chunk of your health away in the split second that it took them to press their GC and start pressing their damage buttons. And it would give you reaction time, and I actually appreciate that. Certainly as playing like double DPS and like some really casual arena 2s, it's quite annoying, for example, to run up against a fire mage in this patch when they're obviously very strong, but with combustion to get absolutely destroyed if you don't react super quickly. So I can kind of understand why these were initially put on the GCD. I actually do. Although I think that certainly for PvE, this is going to make your classes play a lot better. I think that having these off GCD just on the whole is going to make your spec more fun to play. So I do appreciate it. Though, again, slight concern for PvP. More interesting, though, to me, there are still some major GCD issues in the game, and I want to address some of these. And number one, actually, to add on to this first, is there is obviously the question of consistency. This is a massive list of cooldowns, but it's not going to affect all the cooldowns in the game. So I think that, just need to make sure that these things are going to be applied consistently, and that stuff doesn't make sense. Let me show you some examples, I think, of stuff that doesn't make sense. So this is the Protection Warrior has two types of cooldown problem, GCD cooldown problem, that are particularly egregious, particularly bad, let's say. Okay, so we're looking at the Protection Warrior here, all right? First up, defensive cooldowns for the Protection Warrior. You've got Spell Reflection, a 25-second cooldown. It's going to give you 20% reduced magic damage and will reflect or will reflect a spell. It cancels when it reflects a spell. Wait, hang on. I'm in the wrong spec. Duh. That's like die by the sword. That's not a protection warrior thing. Hang on. Here we go. I thought I had it. Yeah, I have them over here on my bar. So number one, Avatar was just removed from the GCD, which is fine. But I think this one could honestly been left on the GCD and it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But the bigger question is, you've got these 4 cooldowns here, defensive cooldowns. Let me show them to you. So spell reflection we just covered. Demoralizing shout, 45-second cooldown. It's going to reduce the damage enemies are going to do to you by 20% for 8 seconds. Last stand will give you 30% max health for 15 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. And shield wall on the 4-minute cooldown will reduce all damage you take by 50% for 8 seconds. One of these is on the GCD and the other 3 are not. Can you guess which one it is? Can you guess which one it is? Because for me, in my opinion, there's absolutely no reason to suspect that one of these would be on GC. Like, would it be Spell Reflection because it's the shortest cooldown? Shield Wall because it's the longest one? Which one is it? Which one is it? Demoralizing Shout. I wonder if you guessed it right if you're not familiar with Warrior. But yeah, Demoralizing Shout is on the GCD. Why is it on the GCD? I have no idea. This really bothers me because it's that lack of consistency. You've got these 4 defensive cooldowns, and 3 of them are off GCD, which feels good. It then feels really bad to have one of your 4 defensives be on the GCD for no real reason that you can tell, and it just feels wrong to play the spec. This is something for me, having gone through now for these beta videos and played all the specs. It feels wrong, right? Your other buttons are responsive. You press them and they immediately happen. Then you press Demoralizing Shout and it doesn't go off. And you feel like, wait, what's happened with my spec? Am I lagging out? Something has gone wrong. Or again, like you mash the button a couple of times, it goes off after the GCD, and then it triggers the GCD itself, and your buttons, your core rotation just stops working, which doesn't happen with the other defensive buttons. And again, it just feels wrong. It's that lack of consistency that really, really bothers me. Like, I don't mind Avatar. That was fine, because Avatar, I'm going, okay, this is really a damage cooldown. I can deal with that being on the global cooldown, but it's when you've got 4 defensives. All 4 defensives should have the same rule. Another major problem that you have, again, and this affects many tank specs, is with your defensives, or in this case, your rage spenders. So, to spend my rage as a protection warrior, let me just generate up some rage here. I've got shield block. This costs 30 rage. This is my core defensive. It's going to increase my block chance by 100%. I've got ignore pain, which costs 40 rage. It's going to give me a shield. That's off GCD. The issue is that our other rage spender, Revenge, is on the GCD. This triggers a cooldown. And again, this feels really bad because it's that lack of consistency. What's going on here? You've got 3 abilities for spending rage, and they are all on the global cooldown. There's also Execute. Execute didn't feel so bad, though. Execute feels fine to me. But Revenge doesn't. I think it's because Execute costs more rage, and it is this massive, substantial hit. It feels okay, and it's on the global cooldown for, like, the other specs. I think it feels okay as a massive damage ability, but Revenge felt really bad. And you get in situations where, as a prot warrior, you want to use your rage. You want to dump rage to do damage, and Revenge dumps so little rage that because you're doing, like, your shield block on cooldown, like, whenever it's going to come off, it can get quite awkward sometimes, like, to actually run out of rage. And especially if you start getting Revenge procs, which makes it free, it can be really awkward. And you can end up in certain circumstances going, okay, I'm just going to have to do an ignore pain to get rid of my rage, because I can't actually get rid of it fast enough while still doing my other stuff here on the prot warrior. And that's just really annoying. I feel like all the rage spenders should probably be off GCD, or at least shield block, ignore pain, and Revenge. I can deal with Execute. It doesn't bother me. But this one felt really bad. I actually did up a little document here just to show you guys. Where are we? Over here. Let me bring this over here. Let me make this full screen. So I actually went through for the tanks, and I've put these on. I said these were, for me, the abilities that felt, for the tanks in particular, either, you know, fine, not great, or really, really bad to be on the global cooldown. So for the protection warrior, we saw it there. Demoralizing Shout. This should not be on the GCD. This is a massive problem. It feels so wrong, and it totally conflicts with the identity of the spell, in my opinion. Revenge, I color-coded this as orange. Like, I could live with this one being on GCD. It's not going to end the world for me, but it just felt a bit clunky to be on GCD. I think it would feel better to be off of it. On the Brewmaster, actually, they have no real problems. And in fact, Celestial Brew, which is their new sort of core defensive, again, that felt fine. In fact, let me add in, actually, here, Execute. I think Execute actually felt fine to be on the global cooldown. That didn't bother me. Celestial Brew for the Brewmasters didn't bother me. This is it's kind of one of your core active mitigation things, but it's a massive shield, and you're only going to be using that shield every every 20 or so seconds, right? Only about every 20 seconds. So I think that felt fine because it's such a powerful shield. That felt fine. Didn't bother me. I think that felt okay. It flowed well with the spec. On the Vengeance Demon Hunter, Fiery Brand is on GCD. It's a defensive cooldown. It's on GCD, I think, because it does some damage as well, but the damage is really low. I kind of felt like this one should be off the GCD, but again, didn't massively bother me on the Vengeance Demon Hunter. It's just something I prefer to be off, but it's really not going to push me too far either way. For the Paladin and the Guardian, putting these two together, for the Paladin, again, Holy Power Spenders on GCD is really, really not good. Not good. So you've got your Shield of the Righteous, which is your equivalent of shield block, also does damage. That's off GCD, feels fine. But then Word of Glory, where you spend your Holy Power to heal, that being on GCD feels awful. Should be off, needs to go off. For the Guardian, same thing. Iron Fur, which is one of your rage spenders, is off GCD, and that feels right. But then Maul, your damaging rage spender, and Frenzied Regen, your other rage spender that heals you, your other defensive rage spender, is on GCD. Absolutely horrendous. Feels awful. Feels absolutely terrible. Again, at least with the Warrior, you're going, my two defensive rage spenders are off GCD at least. With the Guardian, they have the issue where their damaging rage spender is on GCD, but so is one of their defensive, like their equivalent of Ignore Pain, really, is on the GCD. It feels terrible. It really gets in the way, especially with the new Berserk cooldown. That's a major issue. Again, for the Paladin, most of their defensives are off GCD. It felt fine, though, for Divine Shield to be on it, because Divine Shield is a full immunity, and I felt like that actually felt okay. Again, for the Blood DK, Death Strike being on it felt fine, and it's quite nice then if you got a couple of new abilities, your Blood Tap and your Rune Tap, which are off GCD, part of your core rotation. That felt good. Sacrificial Pact, where you can sacrifice your ghoul, he explodes, and it heals you for a chunk of health. That also felt fine being on the GCD. The Dancing Rune weapon, which is, you know, you summon in this weapon, it boosts your parry chance, and it duplicates your attacks. That's on the GCD. I felt like that could come off and would feel better, would get less in the way, would feel smoother, but it's not going to end the world for me. I just want to sort of end with this. This is sort of what my philosophy would be of types of spells and whether or not they should be on the global cooldown, and some examples. So for example, a damage cooldown, which is something that does direct damage, so Wake of Ashes, Meteor, I think they should be on GCD. That's fine that they trigger a global cooldown. You do this attack, it might be a 1 minute cooldown, a 2 minute cooldown, but it's a big powerful attack. It does damage itself. I think that's fine if that is on GCD. However, these things that buff your damage, so like Arcane Power, Bestial Wrath, they should be off. They just removed Arcane Power. For Hunters, they removed Aspect of the Wild, but they didn't remove Bestial Wrath from the GCD. I think these sort of things that are just going to give you X% damage increased, X% haste, whatever, those sorts of things should be off of it. I think they should be off. Also, something like Sweeping Strikes, whatever, that should be off as well, unless it does something. I think the buffs, essentially things that are buffs, should be off. I think for defensives, I think all defensive cooldowns, or basically most of them, should be by default off of the global cooldown. Your defensive CD should be something that you can press immediately and you get rewarded with your reaction just straight away. It feels really bad whenever there's a defensive cooldown that's on the global cooldown. So for example, Retribution Paladins, all of their defensives are on the global cooldown, and that feels super clunky. Immunities, I actually think I'm fine. So Divine Shield, Ice Block, Nether Walk, all that sort of stuff, Aspect of the Turtle, I think they're all fine to be on GCD because they're such powerful effects. They make you totally immune to damage, totally safe, and they, typically speaking, oftentimes, like Ice Block, you can't take any actions in the Ice Block. Nether Walk, you can't take actions. I think they're fine. Like these really large scale defensive CDs feel fine to me, actually, being on the global cooldown. Raid defensives, I think it's okay to have them on the global cooldown as well, like Darkness, Rallying Cry, Anti-Magic Zone. Interrupts, kick, pummel should definitely be off, and they are. Stuns, I think, are fine being on it. So like Cheap Shot, Hammer of Justice, also like big roots and knockbacks, things like that. I think it's fine if that takes a global cooldown. That's fine. And then I think movement spells should be off of the global cooldown. So things like Roll, Charge, they are currently off. But again, it's not a global rule. So I think, for example, the Paladins, once again, with awful movement speed, I think their movement abilities are generally speaking on the global cooldown, which does feel wrong, like your Divine Charge or your Divine Steed. So that's not good. So yeah, that would be my general my general take on it, this is what I think makes sense, and I want that to be consistent. That's the most important thing. These things should be consistent across the board. That's just what makes sense to me. Obviously, there are niche cases where you have certain overlap between something that's, you know, it's a buff, but it also does a bit of damage. But yeah, I mean, this is my thoughts, guys. Let me know what you think. I'm very happy with the changes they put in. I'm hopeful that these changes will be more consistent across the board. And yeah, again, the main concern I have, I can deal with most things being on global cooldown. I prefer, obviously, if you know, these things I think is an improvement. I think I prefer if these things were off the global cooldown. The most important thing, though, is consistency. The absolute worst feeling is when you have spells and one of them is on the global cooldown for no reason. That's terrible. Or again, in a situation where, you know, your rage spenders is a tank, your active mitigation is a tank, particularly for Guardian Druid and Prot Paladin are the worst offenders for this, with Word of Glory and Maul and Frenzy Regen. Really should be off the global cooldown. I think same with Revenge. Just your rage spenders, holy power spenders, rage spenders, they should be off. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to have different rules for abilities that feel like they should be in the same sort of pool of things. Guys, that's what I think. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.